this is where we want to go next. Taking everything we've learned with the spiraling staircase and duplicating and instancing, and we've got uh, a, a strong use of the motion path tool with the path constraint script. I want to be able to put all that work together into creating something like this, where we start making our own little bunch of grapes, and we can control the shape dynamically, even as we're making changes and adding more grapes to it and adding more branches to it. So what I mean by that is that from all these curves were drawn from the top view. This object right, let me turn objects on. This object right here is the master object that I make all of my new grapes from. So this is the one that it starts from. And then I make individual islands, if you will, like clusters of grapes. So these four are instanced, and these four are their own set of instances. And then some of the others are actually collected. So all of these are connected. And I can go through grabbing, say, these locators here that I've created that are actually attached to the main branch, and I can adjust the entire branch and have some changes on it. Or, here's another locator buried deep in here. Or if I want to change the overall length of the curve, I can pull on that, and everything's going to dynamically change and shift with it. The only thing that isn't completely predictable is the lofts that are created. They tend to rip apart, but that's really not a big deal. I have path constrained the profiles for those lofts. So if I need to rebuild them, I can rebuild them in a heartbeat. Another thing to note is that within each cluster of grapes, like let's take these for example, and let's turn off everything except polygon surfaces. And again, I'm using different types of surfaces. Like I'm using the surface for the branch itself, and then I'm using the polygon mesh for the grape. And it just makes it easier when I'm filtering and I want to just select the grape itself, so I can just marquee over a chunk of it. And then what I'm going to do is hit the up key, and I'm looking at this spot right here on the outliner. And I'm going to hit up, and notice it says instance group, don't convert. It's just harkening back to the lesson I had back at the spiraling staircase about not converting the instance group. And if I hit the up key again, now I'm on the transform group. And notice that when I'm on the transform group and I use the rotation handle, I can manipulate all four of these. And because of the original radial array, each one had a 90-degree rotation. So I'm able to rotate them in that local space. And I'm also using object and local rotation, and I'm using object translation. So I'm able to move these in that relative space along that path. So again, I'm hitting the up key, and I can hit the down key to go up and down the hierarchy. And to prove that, just take a look right here. So I'm hitting the up key, and it's walking its way up to the top parent and then down. So the easiest way to use that is not the outliner, because there's so much stuff in here. It's just to grab the pieces that you want to manipulate, and then in this case the meshes, and I'm going to hit the up key to get to the instance group, and then the transform group. And then finally there's like this extra group that holds all four together, and that one is a way for me to move all four at the same time, and also to rotate all four independently without hurting anything underneath. And then if I hit up one more time, that's the actual motion path group. That's the one that controls where it lives on the path. So I've built this hierarchy of controls so that I can manipulate and sculpt the change as I want to add more and adjust it to either match reference imagery or just something that I find visually interesting. Which brings me to another point. I have references that I can work from that I've downloaded and searched for on Google, and let's go grab one. Under the plants. So, I've grabbed a few images like this X-ray of grapes, which I found very interesting. You can see the branch network looking through the grapes. That's probably very, very useful for you. And then you've got all of these other ones, which I found were interesting imagery. But if I was to actually try and make that image right there, I think I'd be here for hours. And so instead of doing that, I want to do sort of a stylization or characterization of the grapes. If you really wanted to make the grapes in detail, I would recommend working with this X-ray of the grapes so you can actually see just exactly what that network of branches is doing underneath, and that should give you more insight on where to go with the grapes. But instead of inundating myself with matching realism, I'm going with stylization. So I made clusters of 4, and I made several duplicates of those clusters of 4, and then I path constrained those sets of 4 along the path. And then I also path constrained more paths. So you can see here I have these extra curves that are actually connected, so I can control their motion path location on that path, so I can branch off into a new direction. Or I could make some wispy vines or attach leaves or whatever needs to be attached in that area. Also note that because of the way we're using instances in this case, the master instance, which I didn't do initially, but I really should have, and I will the next time around when I make this for you, is that I changed the overall shape of it. So it's just a little bit organic, a little bit random, so that when I get to the actual grape, like I was working on a little bit over here, these guys, so I'll hit the up key, and let's just grab one of them. It looks like I grabbed more than one, but I actually just touched one of them with the marquee, and I'm just going to hit the up key twice, and now you can see I actually really do only have one of them. So now I can come in here and do things like twisting it and turning it and just kind of making changes to it to increase that sense of randomization, that increase that sense of variation, so that I can have a couple of sets of instances of grapes, or even one master instance grape, and then just go through modifying their location, their translation, and even their scale in order to give a better impression of a grape. Which is another thing that I realized that I didn't do on this example when I was kind of getting ready for the recording for you, is that I could have made this section of the grapes more one of the word I'm looking for is more stretched out, more grape-like. Like they're a little bit longer, and just that's a better shape, I think. And so I'm going to make sure I'm attentive to those details and make sure that the grapes do indeed get that. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to putting this together for you and introducing you to this little tool I made too, where I can manipulate the shapes. So it'll take a little while, but it'll be really, really great and great for you and managing these content. Alright, so let's make the grapes. We'll start from the top view, and I'll draw a CV curve from the origin. So I'm going to snap to the grid. I'm going to snap 2 points here at the beginning, straight, and then I'll make it about 15 or so units long. Something like that. Maybe change the shape a little bit. So before I go any further, I want to run a tool on this where I can control the CVs without having to actually select the CVs. And I'm going to do this for each sub-branch that I create as well, so that way I can sculpt this without having to actually go into the components for the curve. And the way to do that is I'm going to assign a cluster to each CV, and I'm going to add a locator as a parent to that cluster for us to animate. And all that's going to be automated for you. I wrote a tool to do that. So with this curve selected, we're going to run this new tool called Locators to CVs. And we're going to select all of that and hit play and play it. And what you get, if we go to the perspective view, are these crosshairs that when you animate it, when you translate them, it's going to change the shape of the curve. And that will basically prevent us from having to constantly filter curves on and off and do that nonsense. So we can work with nulls and polygon meshes. So from here, what I'd like to do is make them a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to go to the shading menu and all the way down here to thicker lines, I'm going to set this to 2 and hit enter. And so now these are a little bit thicker and easier to see, and that will affect the wireframe for the wireframe display. So you can adjust that as you need to. Let's make a couple of subcurves to go off of this. So again, I'll go to the top view to draw these, and I'm going to draw them at the origin to make it easier for when I path constrain these. So I'm going to start at the origin and just draw this diagonally for 6 points. And I want a couple of these. Actually, now that the outliner is open, it just reminded me, there's this curve translation group that was automatically made for you by that script. That's how you're actually going to move the curve now if you want to move it globally. You actually will just shift it like that. And then underneath that are all of these subgroups that control the overall shape of the path. And you don't have to actually use those. It's actually the locator that you're going to be selecting and moving. So just keep that in mind, that these are available, and that is ultimately the way we're going to move this entire network of grapes. So back to the sub-branches. We got one diagonal line. I want 2 of these, so I'm going to duplicate it. No need to instance them because I want them to be unique. And I'm going to select all 3 and then make sure the main branch is the last one selected. And I'm going to go to my path constraint tool. And I'm just going to make sure that the expression on line 73 is commented out. So I don't need that. And let's select all of that and hit play. And so now I have these curves attached to the path. I'm going to hit the up key to get to the motion path object and just animate and change the location of this. And I can also change the front twist if you want to rotate it around the path. So I'll rotate it to the opposite side. And you can also animate the up twist to point it in a different direction. So I'll just point it maybe like that. And same thing for this one. I'll hit the up key and maybe adjust the U value of where it's located. It seems to be okay. And then I'll adjust the front twist and the up twist to point it. And then the rest of the, the shape of this, I'll actually sculpt the CVs. And then for this one as well, up key. Adjust the U value a little bit and lower this down so it's towards the ground. And then I'll do a little up twist, maybe point it in that direction. So I'll take a moment at the top view and do just a little bit of sculpting in the CVs, and let's just filter all CVs. And I'll turn on my tweak mode when I do that, so it's just easy to grab points and sculpt this around a little bit. And I'll be right back when I'm done with that. Okay, just something a little less rigid. It doesn't have to be spectacular. It doesn't have to be perfect, because there's plenty of time to adjust that later on, which is the whole point of this setup, is to make sure that we can adjust it at any time that we want to. So let's take those 3 curves and run the same tool on it, the locators to CVs tool. Make sure they're selected in object mode and hit play. And now we've got controllers for all of those. And we also have these translation objects to go with it. So we have our group that actually has the motion path assigning the curves to the main branch, and we have these translation excuse me, and we have these translation groups, which do allow us to translate. If we turn off tweak mode here, it does allow us to translate those and actually break away from the branch. I'm not really interested in breaking away from the branch. I want it to stay right where it is connected. So to help me with that, what I'm going to do is hide the one null that's actually at the point of connection. So I know not to actually touch that one. Also, I won't be translating those branches through this top level group. What I'll do is simply select a null and translate it like so. So in a lot of ways, we actually don't even need to see those curves, but I think I'll leave them there for now just so that we have that visual, and then later on I'll hide them. And let's hide some visual clutter here for the moment. Let's go to the show menu for this viewport and scroll all the way down here, and for the moment let's hide locators so that they're available, we just can't see them right now. And I want to go back to the origin and do some work to make the grape, and that's going to be a polygon sphere, and I'm going to give it 8 by 8 sides. And very important, I'm going to move this object above its pivot point, so above the ground, so that the pivot point's at the base of it. So I'll move it up 1 unit, and then I'll hit the insert key and move its pivot point to the origin, and hit the insert key again to finish that. So now I have the ability to pivot at that point. And I'd like to also switch to the front view and move this up about 2 units. I want to have a bit of stem between the base of the grape to the origin. So I'm going to draw a 6-point CV curve starting from the base right to the origin, something like that. And yeah, and then I can, I guess that's 7. I only want 6 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, there we go. And then what I'm going to do is go to the sphere and select those bottom faces. I'm going to extrude them, offset them in a little bit, and then I'm going to extrude them again. Excuse me, I'm not going to extrude them the second time. I'm going to, with those faces selected, select the, I want to do a polygon extrusion, so I want to select the those last faces right there, and then shift select the curve, there we go, and then do that extrusion along the path. And I want to increase the divisions to about, let's try 8. And adjust the curve. So that it's not so compressed, so I have it not so unevenly distributed. Something like that. And then let's go back to the extrusion and do a little bit of work like tapering, and maybe even some twisting if you want. I could do a bit of work in addition to this, like selecting edges, or even easier, just selecting rows of vertices and doing a bit of scaling. I could do a little bit of scaling maybe right here, sort of flare that out a bit. I also would like to do some change to the grape itself. I would like the grape to have random lengths to it per grape. So what I'm going to do is extract the top part of it, and with mesh and extract, so I have those 2 pieces now. And the curve should still be in charge of this bottom side. Not that I really need it, because ultimately I could just sculpt it all, but yeah, you see it is still in charge down here. So that's fantastic. And I've got a seamless connection. Now what I want, well, you know, a edge-to-edge connection right there. And what I'm looking for, again, is for this piece is to have the pivot point at this location. So what I'd like to do is group it, and then move the group's location, move the group's pivot point, excuse me, down. Let's move it straight down on the y-axis right there, so that if I want to scale this, I can stretch it from that point. Okay, with all of that done, I'm not going to delete the history on it because I want that curve to be live. So I'm going to keep everything the way it is and group that. And now that I have it grouped, I need to do some naming so to keep this clear for me as to what the job of each object is. So I'm going to rename this group right here at the base, with the one for the grape, for stretching the grape. Let's call that stretch. Let's call it the stretch grape group, or just stretch group. Let's just call it the stretch group. That's explanatory enough. And this is going to be the stem mesh, and this is going to be the actual grape mesh. This curve is the stem path curve, and then this group is going to be the, let's just call that maybe grape parts group. I don't think I'm going to be using that for anything because its pivot point's pretty useless. And then this last group, its pivot point's more useful, much more useful. This is going to be the transform group for the grape. Okay, so everything's packed into this transform group for the grape. Now, here's where things get fun and interesting and just a little bit different instancing than we've done before. So if you remember all the way back to when I was describing the very first videos on arrays and instancing, and how if you take duplicates of an instance makes an instance, but it severs its connection from the original instance, it makes its own set of instances with its own unique shape node that it's referring to. I can do that here if I want to isolate groups of grapes from other groups. Or I can use the instance leaf node, if you remember that, and keep all of the grapes connected. So what I'm going to do to get this started is make a radial array of this group, a set of 4, and then I'm going to take that set of 4 and instance leaf node that piece. So it looks a little bit like this. So I'm going to go to the duplicate special option box. Okay, in here I want to reset it, and I want to make some instances, and I want them to be 90 degrees in rotation. And that's what I would normally do because I want 4 of these things. But what I really like is to not have any groups caught up in that instancing. I'd like them to be unique, unlike the previous methods I've been using. So this time around what I'm going to do is have copies, and I want 4 of them. I want 4 unique ones separate from this original one, and I want to instance the leaf nodes. So let's apply that. Oh, and I want them to have rotation, so let's make sure that each one is rotated 90 degrees, like that. So I want copy 90 degree rotation. I want 4 of them in a radial pattern, and I want to instance the leaf nodes. So let's see what we get. So right away, I get the transform group as the top level group selected. I'm going to hit E for rotation and open this up like a flower. Isn't that cool? I really like this. So let's talk about what we've created here. So I'm going to group all of those transform groups and just slide it over to the side here and investigate what we have. Alright, so number 1, I'm going to turn off all my filters and make sure that I'm only selecting polygon surfaces. And I'm going to marquee my grapes, just the top ends of the grapes, like that, because the stems are separate now. And I'm going to hit the up arrow key, watching my channel box. So there's my stretch group. Okay, so now I can don't use the channel box scale feature. Don't do that, because that's a world transformation. We want to use the gizmo. And I've got my scale set to object space. So now I can do this, right? So I can change their shape in sets of 4. I can also, with those objects selected, pop over here to this simple little script that will find the scale on Y and randomize it. So let's try that. You see? So it's just fantastic. So now I can go through and like chunks and hit this little randomization button and get different variations of the lengths of the grape. And of course I don't want it to be too great of a length and variation, so let's make it, instead of, I did that to exaggerate it to show it to you, but probably 1.55 would be more than enough, 1.5, something like that. So let's try something like that. Okay, so that was the point of the stretch group, was for that. Now let's take a look at how the instances are set up. So if we select a face on the side of this grape, notice that we're getting the same face on all of the grapes, including the master grape, the original grape. And also notice that the original grape's scale did not change because these are unique because of that group. Also, the instances are working just fine on the stem as well, so I can make changes to the stems on this area and it'll happen to all of the stems. So that's useful. And let's see here. Also, the curve is still live and connected throughout the instance. So I could go in here and grab the curve, go to object mode, grab the curve, and make adjustments, and notice that it will modify all of them. So I can tweak the shape of the curve at whatever orientation it needs to be when attaching it to the path. Okay. So that gives you some explanation on how exactly this setup is starting to work. And let's open up the group that we created that holds all of these transforms. That's the one that's actually going to get attached to the that's the one that's going to get attached to the path. So this one's going to allow me to translate and rotate freely along the path. So we can actually give that one a name. We can say this is transform on path group. Something like that. Something descriptive that says what its job is going to be. Now, earlier I said we can use instance leaf node, or we can duplicate a set of instances to make another unique set. So in this case, I could select my transform on path group and just do a simple Control-D duplicate and have another set right here. And what's cool about that is that when I want to edit the faces, it's only editing the faces of this set of 4. So I can actually isolate groups by just simply duplicating those 4 pieces. So it's really quite fantastic once you get a good setup going. Frustrating if you don't. So I want to make more of these where they're all sharing the same instance, so when I model them via components, it'll affect all of them. So let's take a look at selecting this top level group, going to the Edit, Duplicate Special, and I don't need rotation because I've already got my flower pattern. Instead, what I want are just a couple more, maybe 5 more, and instance the leaf nodes. And just to separate them for you let's separate them on the x-axis, maybe 4 units, just so that you can see them. Okay, so there they all are. Alright, so I'm going to take all of those and assign them to the main branch. So selecting all of them, minus the original, because we want to keep that one. And I'm going to then Control-click the curve and go get my Path Constraint tool. Path Constraint, and hit play. And like magic, almost like magic, it will attach to it brilliantly. And it does make that extra curve offset tool. We don't need that one because that was for the expression, so I'll delete that. I also had an extra one here. I don't need that one. So the transform group, that's your master. Let's hide it for the moment and take a look at what we have along the path. So you can see that there's some collision, some clipping, and what I can do is take the time to go through and change their position and their scale and all sorts of interesting things. Let's do that next. So here's where you should really just take your time and adjust the positions of the grapes. Even take the time to let's unhide the locators we did, and maybe even do minor adjustments to the locations of those. So let's get locators. It's underneath that question mark icon for locators. And, we can make adjustments. And notice how everything just flows along. It's really quite wonderful. The locators on the sub-branches tend to break away because we're actually moving the components away from those locators. It's not really a big deal. It doesn't break their ability to work. It just changes their visual. So what I want to do is go through and making adjustments and adjusting the rotation and such. So let's start with this top piece here. So let's turn off locators. Let's hide locators for the moment. And let's just select the polygon meshes and hit the up key so here's the grape parts group. Here's the transform group. So the transform group is the one where we rotated, if you remember. So we could control the overall spin and how much it flowers open and closed. And notice it doesn't have any impact on the others because this group is independent, so that's just fabulous. And then we can also do that to just one grape. Like if we want like this one right here to flare out a little bit more, we could hit the up key. And I'm looking right here until we get to the transform group, and I could just flare that out separately. I could continue to hit the up key, and now we're on the transform on path group. And that one's unique because it doesn't actually have the path. But let's go find it. Okay, it's right there. And that one's unique because I would actually be able to spin this entire setup right here and like point it this way or point it that way. So I can do these sort of sub-global or global changes to this group. And if you don't like it, just hop over here and enter 0 on the rotations. It'll just snap right back to where it was. And then if I hit the up key one more time, now I'm on the motion path, and now I can change their location on the path. Again, just sliding that back and forth along the length of the path. So if I don't like it, here, and I want to compress it, over there somewhere, I can. Really quite a fun setup once you get it going and once you get good control over it. Creating the branches will be probably the more frustrating part because they don't tend to coordinate live, especially when you use extrusions. We would probably have to use like a series of circle curves along the length of the path constrain them and then loft them. That will stay in place. But since we're more or less just making a model that's going to be stuck in place, it's not really going to be animatable. I think I'll stick with the extrusion. Let's get that in there actually, so that we have some sense of what it's going to look like. Let's bring in a circle curve, and this will give us a better idea of how we need to adjust these pieces once we get all the stems in there and all the pieces attached. So let's do that. Let's do the circle, and let's make it a smaller radius, about 0.3 maybe. Let's rotate it 90 degrees on the z-axis so it's pointing down the length of the curve. And then let's select the curve to extrude on, and let's use the surface extrusion. Very good. And then let's do a tapering on the scale. Let's do 0.25. And that looks decent, actually. Let's hit number 3 for the grapes so that we have the actual shape of the actual volume of the grape, because the subdivision surfaces is going to compress that down a little bit. And you can see already it's starting to look good, starting to look like a nice organic piece. So let's take the ends of the grapes and let's just hit the up key so that we're at the stretch group, and let's run that randomization on scale. And let's do that to each one. And we don't have to do them in sets of 4. We can do them all at the same time. So let's grab all of those and then hit the up key. And you can see if it didn't say stretch group right here, then I wouldn't run this randomization. And hit play, maybe once more, and then just try to get some changes to those sizes. And then you could do them individually. You could select each grape individually, hit the up key, and adjust the Y scale. And in this case, it's okay to adjust it with the channel box because it is oriented properly. So I could maybe even compress this one down if I want to. Okay, so let's take a look at this grape. Let's hit the up key until I get to the transform on path node. And in this one, I want to do a larger rotation so that it doesn't clip into the path right there. And I think a lot of these changes that I'm making, you know, when you walk your way down to the bottom of the hierarchy, you want to be happy with the top of the hierarchy because it will propagate. It will affect the bottom of the hierarchy. So you want to be, you know, at least satisfied with the bulk changes to the main path. You know, you want to be happy with this main path first. So if this shape or this design of it laying on the floor is not what you're trying to achieve, then I would suggest making those changes to the main branch first so that everything else propagates down to the last child properly. And let's select some locators and do some translating. So I want to repeat this process so that I have a couple coming off this way and a couple coming off of this branch. And I want to move this one. So I'll hit the up key until I get to the motion path. I want to move this one back a little bit. Push that back a little bit. Maybe too much. And then maybe I'll hit the down key. And but I want all 4 grapes when I do this because I want to just sort of compress the flowering of it. So I'm going to hit the up key until I get to the transform group, and that's where the rotation happens. And let's use the Z and just kind of push those in a little bit. Maybe do this one individually. One more up. There we go. We can do those individually. Very nice. And then I could go like down to this null and adjust where that one's located. You know, and if it helps you, it's not really important to me at the moment, but I suppose I could make it important. If it helps you, you could throw in a ground plane, a polygon plane, and you know, make it nice and big, and you know, give you something, you know, to shoot for. So if you're clipping through that, then you've gone too far. If you want to use that as a way to sort of establish a contact point and weight, it's not a bad idea. Let's turn off the grid so it's not too confusing, and let's just move this down a bit. And you know, so for those lower grapes, you know, if I'm clipping through, you know, I want to, you know, correct that. So let's hit the up key until I get to the transform on path. Let's get some rotation, and you know, just like turn that a little bit, like that. Let's make sure I'm not selecting nulls. Let's make sure the ground can't be selected too. Let's put that on a layer and reference it. So now the ground is, and let's name that so we don't forget. And we could turn on wireframes to make this a little bit easier to see. And so I'm just going to go through, I'm going to grab these grapes, hit the up key until I get to the transform group, and I'm going to rotate on the Z-axis to maybe, like, you know, push those in a little bit. Maybe not the 2 on the top so much, but no, maybe I will. Maybe just kind of press those down until they're touching. That would seem more realistic. That's a good idea. I should do that on the next one. Transform group, z-axis, and just kind of pushing those down until they touch. Something like that. Something in that way. So, you know, and it's endless really, but let's get a couple of others attached. It's not looking too bad, huh? Let's get a couple of others on these sub-branches. So I'm going to minimize this work here. Might as well name it over here. And, okay, that's going to be my branch. Let's not forget what that is. That's my branch surface and my branch profile. Something like that. And we can hide the profile object. And let's work with the original grape. So let's unhide that. Shift H. And let's and frame it up. And let's make another couple of sets of grapes for the sub-branches. Alright, so let's make a few more sets of these. I'm going to go back to my duplicate special with the transform group selected. And I want not... Well, yeah, sure. Let's do... see, we got 3 sub-branches. Let's maybe do 2 for each. So let's make 6. And everything else can be the same. They don't need to translate. And instance leaf nodes. So let's hit apply. Actually, I messed up there. Let's delete those. Don't undo it. Actually, delete them. I found undoing is a big problem. Let's do reset. Let's see here. Copy. Yeah, instance leaf node 90. That's what I wanted. 90 degrees and a total of 4. That's what I want. So I need another flower. And that looks good. And apply. There we go. Okay. And let's just leave that open. I'll need it again. And then these can be grouped. And we can open those up on the z-axis rotation a little bit. Let's do something like that's okay. Let's do the name, which was, let me make sure I use the same transform on path, right. There we go. And that's the one where I want to have no rotation on them, no translation, and 6 of them, so 2 for each sub-branch. Well, I've already got 1, so I suppose 5. And we'll hit apply. So let's take the first 2 and shift select the curve. Let's get curve selectable, curve, and then run the path constraint. And because it's only 2, one will be at 0, the other one will be at 1. Let's get the next 2 and get the next curve and run it there. And let's get the last 2 and the last subcurve and run them there. So pretty good. So it's clustered up a little bit in here, so let's clear that up, and let's also clear up these nulls that were made again that came from the script. Extra pieces required for the expression that we're no longer using. Let's get the transform path for, let's use the up key for that. So let's go up, 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 there we go. One more, up, there we go, motion path. So we want the U value, so let's adjust that and just move it forward on the path. Something like right there looks okay. And then let's do it with this one. Up, 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 up. And there we go, motion path. And let's just drop it back, maybe 0.9. Drop it back a bit. And then we could do a little bit of sculpting of the curve. So let's get locator selectable again. And move this out a little bit. Like so. Something like that, you know, where they're not colliding in so badly. just I love it. You know, seeing it move and animate in that way. It's just really cool. And I'm actually kind of surprised at how reasonably Maya doesn't seem to want to puke on me right now. It seems to be holding everything together very well. So that says something about how just how well this is put together so far. um, so here we go. We'll rotate that transform path. Let's do a rotation on it on the y-axis to spin it. And then let's go up. Let's go down. Let's get the 4 grapes. Let's go up, up, up to transform group and rotate it. And just compress that down a little bit more. Let's also get those 4 grapes and run the random scale on it. Let's do it on those as well. Let's run random scale. There we go. That's fine. And let's get the null. Where did that guy go? Right there. There's the null. Number 4 there, just so I can see where that null is. And let's translate that up a little bit. Try and get that. Try and get these bottom grapes from colliding so badly. Let's go up until I get to the transform path and do a little spin on this one as well. Get my 4 grapes and hit, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hit the up until transform group and then rotate on Z. Maybe just pull those in a little bit. Something like that. Maybe go back to the transform and just until those grapes are touching the ground. So something like that. Not too shabby. Alright, so more over here. This guy is compressed quite a bit, so let's hit the up key until we get to the transform and the motion path. Let's increase that U value. And let's also just take a moment to shrink down the overall length of this curve a little long. Something like that. And let's get the same stuff here. And I'm just going to keep going through, adjusting these until I get something that, something that I like, something that's some kind of characterized, stylized grapes or avocados or plums or something, I suppose. I'm not necessarily making grapes anymore, am I? And just keep going through. Making adjustments as you go. Making tweaks. And getting the transform path and rotating that on the y-axis again, and then see, it's important that when I want to kind of flower them in and out with the Z rotation, that I have all 4 grapes selected when I walk up the path. Otherwise, I'm only going to be doing 1 at a time, or I could do 2 at a time. You know, I could do that. I could do like 1. Oops. That one, and then, hit the up key until I'm at the transform path and just do those 2. I could just do those 2 right there. Let's do some randomization on the grapes again. On these. We didn't do it over here. And I don't think I did it on these either. Let's do that, and up key, and let's just hit play, something like that. And let me confirm that I did it correctly over here. Yeah, I didn't do it correctly. You see, I did run this. You probably caught that actually. I ran the scale on the grape itself, which is not a good idea. I want to run it on the stretch group, so I'm going to hit the up key. Yeah, on the stretch group, that's what I want to run it on. There we go. That's much more predictable. And then I've got this guy collapsing. Okay, and I can change the shape of the stem too. I can come back here to the master, or any one of them for that matter, Doesn't have to be the master, but I suppose it's easier to see on the master. Oh, it's so hard to grab. There it is. Grab it. Got it. And then just adjust these a little bit so it's not so dramatic. There we go. Something like that. Okay, and let's get like these two. Let's rotate that one. Let's get this one. Maybe this one a little bit. Starting to get fast at this. Doesn't take long. And it pays off to go through this a little bit at a time and, you know, get it just right. It really does, because when we get to the shaders, when we get to the occlusion shader for the final render, this could look very nice. So I am going to take the time to get reasonable look to it. Now I actually need, I just realized, I just remembered. Let's hide the master. I need stems on the sub branches. I need to extrude those. So let's do that next. Yeah, so let's work on those stems. I also noticed that with this separation of the grape, it's actually going to be a pretty good and straightforward texturing process to throw on a separate texture for the grape, the stem, and the branch. And, you know, with a little bit of clever distance and depth of field and such, this plant could look good as a background piece. Alright, so we need a couple of primitive curved circles, and we need them to be at the base of the stem. So there's a lot of material here. Let's just hide all polygons for the moment, and let's hide locators. There we go. So that's looking pretty good. Look at that. That's kind of cool, right there. Like he had just picked all the grapes off. All right. So now I want to. I think what I'm going to do actually is a couple of these along the length of the path. So I think I'm going to make 4. So I'm going to make 4 of them. I'm not going to duplicate it because I want them to each have their make NURB circle input. If I duplicate this circle, watch this, it actually destroys that input. So for some reason, when you duplicate something in Maya, it doesn't actually keep those original inputs. So if I want to have those inputs like this radius parameter, I need to actually just create a few more. So I'll make 4. And I'll take those 4 and shift select the curve, and I'll path constrain them. Like that. And what we're going to do is loft on those 4, and then we'll be able to control the shape and everything of it. I think this is a fair and good way to work. And the cool thing is that when we're modifying, when we modify the overall shape of this branch, those will go along with it. So we won't have that problem where extrusions rip away from the surface like this loft would, like this extrusion would. So let's grab those circles and change the radius on them, maybe down to 0.2, maybe 0.3, and then go to the surface menu. Oops, surfaces and loft. So that works out pretty good. And then the tapering can be handled by me. So let's add a few divisions, and look at that. See, we can add spans so that we can more accurately match, and I can then go through and individually change the radius or scale of that piece. So I don't have this, so I won't have this linear taper, which really doesn't look natural at all. I can then go through and actually, you know, govern each area and, you know, make changes in that way. So I can come over here and bring that down a little bit, or maybe just change its position a little. Well, I can't change its position, but because it's actually motion path. Well, can I? No, I can. That's right, because it has the motion path group with the motion path on it. So I can come in here and change the position of the circle, and also change the radius. There we go. Yeah, like that. Looks good. Okay. And then maybe, something like that. Okay. Ah, that doesn't look good. Maybe 0.2. Is that one? That one, make that 0.22. There we go. Okay, so a bit of a taper to it. And let's do the same process for the other sub-branches. Not these little ones. Those already have been extruded. Just these bigger ones here. So let's hide those nulls again. Locators, excuse me. I keep saying null from Softimage. Locators, what I mean. We don't need the branch surface. And we don't need the branch profile because we're going to rebuild it. So let's do maybe 6 circles. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And path constrain those to the main branch. Very nice. And then those circles, we'll select them and change the radius maybe to 0.4. Might be too thick, maybe 3.5. And let's loft them. Oh, again, surface menu. Surface menu, there we go. Loft. And let's do 4 spans so it's more accurate. And then we can go through each one here, modifying it down a little bit. So let's like reach for like point. Maybe that's too small. 0.1 maybe. Okay. And let's do the same thing on the next one. So 1, 2, 3, 4 on that one. And play. And change the radius. I could have changed the radius ahead of time actually. That would have been easier. A little bit like that. And we could then, oh yeah, and then spans. Let's add some spans to it. And then when I convert the polygons, I can then go through and make even better connections. So with 8 divisions all the way around, based on the 8 points of the circle, it should be pretty easy to make connections in here. Okay, and let's do the last one, and I'll be right back when I'm done. Yeah, so I'm done with that one. I'd like to make these connections a little bit more natural, so instead of like straight off, I'm going to turn on my locators and make a couple of adjustments to those, which will change the overall look of it. And I could even change the value of this entire path. Maybe tuck it down here a little bit. Yeah. There we go. I got my U values. Got my curves mixed up there. So something like that. And get that one up here a little bit more. And I'll do the same thing here. And I guess that's reasonable, because then I'll have to go through and make massive amounts of changes anyway. Alright, let's hide the locators one more time. Let's tuck this down here. Let's show the grapes. Alright, so let's turn off the wireframe and see how many remaining bits of clipping I need to do. So let's say this guy, let's hit the up key a couple times. Rotation. No more clipping for you. Some major clipping on that guy. Okay. some on this one. And I recommend working from the ground up. Build on top of it, so don't worry if you're clipping on something above it. You can always adjust it afterwards, like right there. I'm going right through the stem. There we go. That's a little bit better. Yeah. And you know, just a smidgen of clipping isn't going to hurt. I just don't want a lot of clipping. And I'm not worried about gimbal lock and any of that stuff because we're not animating this thing. I'm simply using hierarchies and this sort of structure to procedurally model. That is my goal, and I am achieving my goal. So looking pretty good, and then of course, you know, choosing a particular type of angle at which to view it, it can look very interesting. I think from the top it's a little too easy to interpret, although is interesting nonetheless. And really, I think this nearly wraps things up for us. Now it's a matter of organizing and maybe just a bit of naming here and there, some material, and some way of transporting everything. So we need to make a decision of, do we want to convert all of this to polygons, duplicate those, freeze it, delete the history, things like that, or do we want to leave it live for further adjustments? So let's make some decisions next. I think what I'd like to do first is apply a couple materials so we can get a good sense of what this looks like. Let's go back to the master object and unhide it. And let's apply a material to that one. And let's apply, for the lack of a better idea, let's just apply Phong and give it, you know, some greenish like tint. And I want that material on all the other instances. So what I'm going to do is select the objects by their name, and that would be in this little tool up here, select by name. And the name of the original is Grape Mesh. So here's where naming really helps out. So I'm going to say grape underscore MSH, and then I'm going to hit with a wildcard, so an asterisk. And notice it grabs all of the grapes. And I'm going to right click on any one of them and choose Assign Existing Phong Material. Wasn't that sweet? Okay, and let's make a one for the stem. And that would be, I don't know, I guess a Phong material again. Some brownish tones. You know, obviously I'm not going to be working on some major texturing here or anything, but and let's just darken that down a little bit. Okay, and you know, really basic stuff. And let's do the same process of selecting my name. So let's select stem underscore wildcard, and I get all of the stem objects. Right click on any one of them and choose Assign Existing, and choose the second Phong node. You know, and of course, to be clear, I should be naming the shaders as well, but I'm only going to have about 3 in this scene. Let's apply the same one to the lofted surfaces. So let's grab those surfaces, and let's do a renaming for those. Let's call those branch surfaces, and let's do, you know, while they're selected, let's apply the existing material Phong too. Okay, so that's simple enough. The rest of it would be organizing and renaming. So I think that at this point I need to make a decision on, you know, is this thing actually going to work? Meaning, can I actually translate this entire piece? So here's that original curve translation, which was the main branch, which I never did name. if I translate this, will everything go along with it, or will it break? I love it. So it's working, and it's working because I'm actually translating everything, and and the branches are coming along for the ride because I've lofted it. Now rotating it will be a little bit of a different story. We should have some breakage. It should start breaking if I try to rotate this main group here. So let's see how much we can break it. Yeah, you see how it's starting to twist? That has to do with the up vector. So actually reorienting the entire branch really isn't going to be much of an option without totally torquing over on those pieces. So we would have to change we would have to do some major work, like change the up vector for those motion paths to be the z-axis, or maybe write a script that would seek out and find all of those pieces. Don't really want to do that right now. I think this is more than enough for getting the job done, and for the purposes of rendering, I think that you could just as well go through here and select NURB surfaces and planes, ignore the curves, grab everything, and do an export of that stuff. And that would be under here, File, Export Selection. Might as well go to the option box. And what you want to do is just say don't include the history. So it'll wipe out history, channels, expressions, constraints, everything, and it'll just be like a solid, it'll just be a mass of items. So when you hit save and close, let's actually try that again. Export selection. There it goes. So this window is supposed to pop up. And I have a folder inside my scenes folder called exports. And I'll just create right there, grapes finished. And it'll treat it as a .ma file. Did we get the materials? I'm going to assume yes, because it doesn't say I didn't include the materials. So those materials went with it too. And go to a new one. And I'll import those grapes. And there they are. So with the materials ready to go, and already modeled and ready to go to lay on a flat surface. So now reorientation is not such a big deal. So I can grab all of this stuff, drop it on under some main group, and then when I rotate that group, now it's perfect, you see, because we've severed the connection from those curves. So we've lost our ability to dynamically model them, but we have gained the ability to lay them out into a scene. Beyond that, we would have to have a much more sophisticated rig if you wanted to be able to dynamically change them over time. But that was never the intent of using those hierarchies. It was simply to be able to handle multiple pieces and understand structures, and I swear by the time you go through this, your head will be spinning if this is your first time doing something like this, but it's so good for you to understand how things are working within Maya and how you can take advantage of those tools to model with and make complex looking structures. Alright, it's been fun, and we'll see you in the next section.